You talking about practice?
Okay, Cassandra, how are you today?
Awesome, Miss Scales. I'm so used to calling you Miss Baru.
Oh, that's the name I use still, professionally.
Okay.
And you can just call me Candice, because the honest truth is that's more of who my identity is.
I
So
know.
first
I'm
name,
just joking with you because we're on your podcast. I wanted to be official and call you Mrs. or
oh,
Miss.
you don't have, we not like that over here. We not like that over here. So, all right, today I had originally, and I reached out to you to do this podcast with an original different topic. And then the world shifted again. And in
Yeah.
light of what we just recently saw in Buffalo and in California, I said, Cassandra, we have to change the topic. We have to talk about this. So today's topic is called We Can't Stop Now, Overcoming Emotional Exhaustion to Fight Racial Injustice. And I read your bio before you got on, but, because I didn't want your head to get big and blown up. It's 2 pages.
Too
You're doing too
late.
much. You're doing too much.
It was not
So
2 pages. You have a bad down.
it's 2 pages. You're doing too much. It's probably gonna be three before by the next time you come on.
Yes.
Yeah. But go ahead and tell us stuff that's not on the bio, stuff that would not necessarily make the bio, but that's important to who Cassandra is as a person.
All right. So serious stuff or lighthearted. So FYI, I enjoy music. This is just about me personally.
Mm-hmm.
I love music.
Are we gonna say Jay-Z biggest fan?
Used to be until he's really shown his behind. Now, when you grow up, you start.
Oh, okay.
So he's done some things that have, but I used to be Jay-Z's biggest fan. I used to dance. I was on the dance team in college. What else about me? I'm the youngest of three siblings. My older brother, Dr. Tracy Edward Smith. If you think I have a big head, he would have a one. And I have an older sister, Terry Ann Confair, and she does not hyphenate, and she makes it a point that she does not want to. And they are both out of town, but they're 8 and 10 years older than me, respectively. So I am the baby. And my mother was she had me later in years. So she probably was about 37,
Oh.
had me. So I was a surprise bundle of joy, is what she says. I was really just a surprise.
Me and your mama have something in common. My oldest is 18 years older than my youngest as well. Big gap.
That's a big gap. Yeah.
18 years. Yes, yes. All right, so we're gonna shift because we're gonna get more to your professional experiences. And I know your resume, but can you speak to like your experience as a trauma expert?
Sure. So I really have been primarily in my career focused on children and families. However, of course, that means you cannot work with children and families without working with their parents. And so my area of specialty has always been high risk, vulnerable, and particularly minority families who experience trauma. And that trauma can range from abuse, domestic violence, um, losing a parent, have an incarcerated parent, um, you know, adult victims or survivors of sexual assault, um, from traumas that include car accidents. So it can run the gamut, but it really also has focused on families and adults and clients who have had complex trauma, meaning they have not just had one incident in their lives that they consider traumatic, they've had multiple. And so that means that when they finally come into treatment, most of them, they have a compounded effect of symptoms that are often misunderstood. And that's really why it's complex trauma, because many people either have misdiagnosed them or they have never received treatment. And so these events, and some of which we're going to talk about that are even applicable to what we're talking about today, has affected them in such a way that it's become a part of who they are. So it doesn't look like trauma symptoms.
And one of the things I wanted to know, because we talk about this often, is your practice is primarily patients or clients who have experienced trauma. You don't have the word well, like I always talk to you about.
I tried to get a few,
Mm-hmm.
but they keep pulling me back.
Because trauma is so prevalent that even when you anticipate this client is coming in for one thing, trauma is part of their story.
Correct.
hmm And when I said we were going to talk about racial trauma, before we talk about it as clinicians, I want to just check in with you personally. How are you doing in light of?
Well, I will say that what I've done is just started turning the TV off because I find myself talking back to the TV. That's something
Mhm.
my dad did, rest his soul. so, so he would just be fussing at the TV, and I'm like, I find myself saying things back to the television.
Mhm.
It's time for me to turn it off. So I found myself, even when it's, talking about things that are particularly interesting, poignant, or I agree with, it's not helpful to me, not right now. And so I think in reference to what you're talking about is, I have right now decided to change the channel.
Mhm.
For my own self-care, I have to change the channel.
And from, of course I know you, but one of the things I know about you is that you are an activist, and that's not on your bio, and you didn't mention it, but you have protested about racial injustice and spoken up and written letters, and you say I don't want to talk about that right now.
No, it's not that. I just forget. You know how you forget, like, okay, so this is probably a story that's relevant. When we recently had a shooting, and that was when it wasn't, this was a few years back, and it was a, and I'm trying to remember, and that's sad. This is what's so sad, is that there have been so many
Mhm.
events, but this was one that was local, and I don't believe it was relative to Ronald. I don't want to say the person's name. I don't even want to give him
Yeah, please don't do that. But we both remember the
this was in
incident.
the news, and it was
Yeah,
in a local area. That's the way I'll put it.
yeah.
So the protest was right, or they were supposed to be protesting in our area, and so I actually, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I actually was in my office, and when I heard about the protest, I remember my office manager was like, "Where you going?" I picked up my purse.
Mhm.
I just left my office, and I was like, "I'm going. Bye." I canceled my 4 o'clock. Heels,
Mhm.
went right over there to the front of the police station. So I have and will do that, but I also have to make sure that I'm taking care of myself.
And so, like you said, that was recent, but I think that was
No,
2015.
that was a while back when
Right.
I actually, yeah, the incident
Yeah.
I'm talking
And
about.
so one of the things I want to think is, or I personally thought, it's 2022. You know, we're moving forward. We passed that, and this incident just reminded me of how much further we have to go. And so I hear you saying for self care, I have to turn off the TV or I have to cut off the news. But I do know you to be one that gets involved, heavily involved in any aspect, as far as advocacy in any way you can. And so I know you're going to be, speaking up and out about this as you're able to with the boundaries in place. But besides cutting off the TV, what else are you doing for self care? Because this is hurtful.
I've started to, as you know, I've gotten a trainer, so I've started to work out, and I'll give a shout out to him, D Joseph Fitness. He's an excellent trainer, Instagram page, but um, that definitely has helped, and it came right at the right time because I'm probably like a couple of months in. So it's definitely been a stress reliever. So I definitely work out. I'm as you and I are laughing, I'm always laughing about something. So I tend to find the humor in as much as I can on a daily basis, probably more than most people and probably more than I should
Mm.
to about things. That's the way I take care of myself. I make sure I focus on, I try to be future minded, meaning where do I see myself so that I'm
Mhm.
not in whatever the present moment is, but also to kind of doubling back. For me, that was self-care. For me to pick up my purse and say I'm going out there. And the
Mhm.
reason is because, and this is one of the things that I've talked about before too, to other professionals is we can channel our anger. You know, there was even an article that I recently read called Black Rage, and talking about that's how we produce results. You know, so many of us, much of what we've accomplished is because of that, whatever it is in us that pushes us forward. And so for me to have to pick up my purse and go out there, that was like cathartic for me. That was me feeling like I was doing something and not around. So that was helpful to me.
And I think you're saying it's something that's very important as far as where do we see ourselves in the fight and what do we see as our role. And for myself as a person who, you know, is a healer, I definitely see myself as having a role in these type of incidents, but I'm also tired. You know, the last time I thought was the last time, and then there was the next time, and I thought that was the last time, and then there was a next time. And I don't want to live in a world where I anticipate a next time, but I live in a world where there is constantly a next time.
Yes. And I don't want to make it any worse, but I probably, what I'm about to say, it's not gonna make you feel any better. But me, I think what helps is that I have to pay attention to my temperature because that changes, you know, but unfortunately, those things in the world don't change. And they get actually worse, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that there's no hope. That just means that as time progresses, things tend to get progressively worse, unfortunately, like what we're seeing. I think for me, what helps me is that, and this is what has helped me to be productive in some of the most difficult work environments. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of that later. I'm not going to jump. But knowing that on a regular basis, these things are happening, whether we see the videotape or not, right? Whether it hits the media or the news or not, whether we read the article, whether we know about the event or not, there are multiple instances of racial trauma that happen when people walk in emergency rooms. You and I have talked about certain things that happen to African Americans. Go to the doctor, we witnessed them firsthand.
Right.
So knowing that, in a weird way, keeps me grounded because then I don't react as much when there's some high profile event that happens, because I kind of have a consciousness, and I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe you can tell me, Doc. But I have a consciousness that these are things that happen regularly. And so that's probably speaking to your point in talking about racial trauma. That's part Black people have a consciousness of every day.
And I think when you say good or bad, you know, as therapists, we try to throw those words out. It's not good or bad, it just is. And I know that what you're doing is correct. You're saying I just radically accept the fact that these things happen, can happen, will happen, you know, have happened. And that's how I'm able to perform my job. I'm able to do what I'm doing. I'm able to live in this world. But I still try to have hope that and so these kind of things are hope snatchers and hope stealers for me personally when I see it, especially because the perpetrator, and I'm just going to use the word that, you know, I feel is the correct word, the murderer was 18 years old. So then my heart breaks for the youth. So when we talk about racial trauma, there's so many layers, because the trauma, of course, as Black people that we experience, but there's also trauma from, you know, just knowing that kind of hatred can happen at such a young age. So I guess
I don't know. I don't want to stop you. Did you see that video with the little 9-year-old boy at somebody's door with a whip?
I did not.
Little girl.
I did not.
So that literally was a viral video probably a couple of days before this shooting, a day or two before the shooting. And it just paralleled what's really sad. And I think it made me doubly sad, to your point. This is a 9-year-old coming to harass and bully and violently threaten a little Black girl. So yeah, there goes that hope snatching. I'm sorry.
You're just
But it's
yeah.
unfortunate, but it's the reality
Mhm.
because they're children and
Right.
they're being taught by hateful adults or passive or what's the word I'm looking for? Apathetic adults,
Right.
just as guilty as those who are perpetrating overt acts of hate.
Right. The parents who are saying, I had no idea this was
Yeah,
happening in my
correct,
house. And I
correct.
almost want to say, if you're, and I know you see me distracted for a second, but I forgot to cut on Do Not Disturb. I want to say, if you're not teaching anti-racism in your house, then you're almost teaching racism in your house. If you're
You're
not,
not, you are teaching it in your house. There's
you're not gonna let me mix words. You're not gonna let me put that buffer on it.
mm-mm.
Mm-mm-mm.
You it's either anti-racist or racist. There's no, I don't really, and what I hate is, and I just recently saw this on social media, is people saying, oh, it's, can we not talk about politics? Since when did not being racist become a political view?
It's no,
And
no.
people use that coded language to say, can we not talk about politics? Listen,
Mm-hmm.
we're not doing that. You mean, can we not talk about racism? Because now, unfortunately, and I'm not going to get into that, clearly there's become a political divide where racism is on one side, allegedly, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe that, and anti-racism is on another, and that's pathetic. That means we really have some issues.
Yeah, and like you said, we don't want to go down that path because we'll be talking about something else. And so I want to
Oh,
bring us back into talking about, as therapists, how do you deal with, obviously we're talking as therapists to each other, and that's part of the self-care, talking with colleagues who are trained. But clients come in and we're still processing it. We just found out the news. We just heard about it ourselves. We're still processing it, yet we also have to process it with the client. And how do you deal with that, especially when it's things that hit home, like things that make you say, I need to do something, but you also have to talk with your clients about it?
well, I think I would be remiss in the climate that we're in if a client came in and something like this tragedy occurred, whether we consciously acknowledge it or not, it's going to be in the room with you.
Mhm.
And I think that actually kind of referenced one of the things that we were going to talk about, at some point. You probably will in your podcast, but
Mhm.
it's a disservice to not acknowledge it. And that doesn't mean that you have to bring it up, but you certainly, if there's room to do so, if your client processes it, I think it's important that you are transparent,
Mhm.
that is appropriate. And I think that you have to allow your client to be transparent in a way that's feels like it's helpful to them. So if that means, you know, whatever they say, if they have to curse or whatever they have to say. And I think you have to be able to acknowledge how frustrating and hurtful or angry you are. And I think that actually builds the therapeutic relationship.
Mhm.
Because no one, any service that comes to your office to pretend like the things that are going on when they leave are not there.
Right. Right. And actually, I was just talking with someone today about this, as far as not wanting to be angry about it, but wanting to actually do something helpful, but feeling so much anger that it's hard and to be helpful. And so, does that ever happen where you're just like, there's a difference between being therapeutic and talking. And with issues like this, I know for myself, I definitely could cross the line to that talking space where we both in the same space, talking about the issue, um, equally angry about the issue, processing it, but not necessarily moving to that helpful space. Is there something that you do to move to that helpful space?
I don't see why that wasn't the helpful space. So that's the way that I view it. And
Hmm.
that's psychodynamic theory, right? Is that
Hmm.
what you're doing and the movement that you have with the client has with you, and then there's a space in the middle. And so what's helpful is actually the interaction that you're having that it's authentically what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, depending upon the clinical orientation of the therapist, they may or may not go that route. But I think what you just described, depending upon what your clinical, I guess, intervention or integration or theory is with that particular client, that could very well be the helping space. So, and I'm just saying that so that you don't count what's happening, because there's a lot that's happening with you and that client right in that moment that could very well be helpful.
And I think that would require intentionality. And that's what I'm talking about. And so when I heard you went quickly, you snapped from regular to clinician, and I love it. But let's just talk about a regular person who's listening.
Okay, all right.
You get what I'm saying? Because if you're not intentional as the therapist, of what you're doing, and like you said, you went into what theory you're using, obviously in doing that you're intentional. But if I just go to that core piece of me that needs the healing, and that's the thing I wanted you to speak to, but you knew I wanted you to speak to that, and you sidestepped it. Because if you're not intentional, then you could also enrage yourself and the client.
So I'm glad you said that, because I hear where you're trying to go, and I guess I don't even think like that, because we've been doing this a long time. But I hear exactly all right. So essentially, there are times when, especially if you're a newer clinician, let's just go ahead and put that out there. If you are a newer clinician and you're not cognizant of your responses, you will in fact be using the session to take care of you instead of doing what's in the best interest of your client. And that's what you're talking about. And
that was what I was talking about.
Okay. So what I will say to that is that that's where appropriate consultation, supervision, and to really pay attention to when you're emotionally reactive to anything, not just this subject matter, but I know you have to be able to have the insight and self-awareness to understand. And that's a part of self-care, to understand when there are subject matters that you are, for whatever reason, highly reactive to, triggered by, that's the common word, triggered. And then now what do you do when those subjects come up? So I have had in the session, a little girl, I might have told you this story.
Okay.
It's probably not funny, but I'm laughing, so it's inappropriate laughter. Y'all go ahead. And so this little girl said to me that her cat's name was Jigaboo.
Do recall.
But she's so cute, and I'm just gonna put this out here. The little girl was like 3, maybe 4, and that was the oldest was 4, and she couldn't say it. She said Jigaboof. So first of all, this little girl, she's so cute, and it was so innocent because she didn't even think she was saying anything wrong. But I'm using this example because I know for a fact, because I've done supervision and so have you,
right?
There may have been some individuals who would not have responded appropriately in that moment with that little girl. And I think that's what you're talking about. So if for whatever reason, I just finished watching something that had me emotionally triggered and I was reacting, and then I go into a session and something like that happens, or I actually had a parent say to me, use the term colored, like in 2020 something. And she was serious. She had straight face, and there was nothing about her that was, she didn't find it offensive. She didn't think anything was wrong with it. She just used the term colored. So you have to be conscious of the fact that everything that you're doing is a dynamic and a dance. And so if you're not aware of that, you will easily put yourself in a position to either do damage, or like you said, to take over the session and try to really heal yourself in the session.
Right. And the thing about it is, like you're saying, being intentional and self-care and all of those things have to be happening all the time, especially when you're working with trauma. But I probably, like everybody else, was minding my Sunday, and then this happens. Well, I have to go to work Monday, right? So the time to implement my self-care plan was very limited. And so, any advice for those therapists who do have to work in those areas where it's like, okay, this just happened, and now I have to roll with it?
I definitely would say, first of all, how many days you have off.
Okay, I didn't think about it. You saying call in. We gonna call in?
100%, 100%. I'm an advocate for that.
Mm.
And I'm anybody, what is it? Born after 1981, they definitely believe in mental health piece. But anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, I am a proponent of taking care of your health, period, and that is your mental health as well. So if
Hmm.
there's that has happened, or you just feel emotionally um, not not centered or grounded, you can't go and work with clients. Like, you cannot. So
Hmm.
you have to call in, you have to cancel a session. It's okay to do that. And it's okay to do that before you get to the point where it's interfering with your professional practice.
Right.
Um, and before it gets to the point where it interferes with your mental health, you need to make sure that you're taking time to say, I'm just going to turn off the TV. I'm going to rest. I'm going to take a nap. I'm also a proponent of power naps. I'm a proponent of turning off your phone. I don't set do not disturb is on my phone at a certain time in the morning, a certain time in the evening.
Well,
So
you
you
just
have to
spoke
do
my
those.
language with naps. You know, I'm the queen of
Yeah, I
naps.
know. Like, people minimize the importance of naps. Your
Hmm.
and mind are healing when you take a nap. So if that was to happen, and you don't have any time, and you really feel like you are not in a space to really engage with people, because that's what you're talking about, then you need to
Right.
take off, even if it's the morning. And you need to be in a space at a place. If you feel like you can't take off your job, you're in the wrong job, and you're already burnt out.
Okay. Well, that's another topic for another day where we talk about burnout. But I want to ask you this. As far as when you're talking about specifically racial trauma, and again, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen so much of it. And, sometimes people make jokes and they might say, oh, that was a Karen moment or things like that, try to lighten it. But the reality is, it's not funny. And we're sick and tired of it happening. But do you process it differently? Like when you have a client who is white versus a client who's black and wanting to process it? Is your process different as the therapist?
It's a very good question. No, it
I
is
love
because
look. I love your answer and the bluntness. Go with it. Go ahead.
seriously, because I'm not different. If I'm in the session, the common denominator is me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't process it. And especially if you're talking about how I manage or engage with that client, I'm still me, right? I'm still an
Mm-hmm.
African woman, whether the client is white or black. And so
Mm-hmm.
I have to, and this goes kind of back to what you've done before you got into the session. So I already have my ideas about what happened Saturday, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I have had to process that individually before I walk in the door with the client. And if I didn't do that, it would not necessarily be productive, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that whether that client is white or black, um, my response needs to be one that's gonna, as you stated, be intentional and be one that is going to move that client forward in whatever their process is to work through that circumstance. Because the other thing is that many times these events are metaphors for the things that client has
Mm-hmm.
experienced. So, but in order for me to do any of that, white or black, I have to have processed it before I entered the session. So another good example is I had a client who, I'm not going to give too much detail, but essentially there was an issue with a child dating a African American or engaged socially with an African American male, and there was an accusation of sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very, very fragile, that conversation, because, but I still was able to have it in such a way that was helpful, I think, to that mother, because she then understood the historical context of that accusation. And we were able to have that conversation. And I think it was very helpful to her understanding the dynamics with herself, her daughter. Like, so it all kind of tied together. And it was not an easy conversation at all, because my response was, do you know who Emmett Till? Like, I hold on for a moment. Because I was like, are you serious? Like, all this is going on in my head. And I will say to new therapists, it's okay to be quiet for a moment. It's okay to not talk if you don't know the right response. There may not be a response. The response may be no response.
And I like what you said. A lot of stuff happening in your head, but not all of that is coming out of your mouth.
Right.
Right. And I worked I don't anymore, but at one point in my career, I worked in a predominantly white community. Maybe 85% or so was white. I was the only Black therapist in that office. And I oftentimes got told things because I was not black, as they would say. I was different Black.
What is that podcast? That's a good. Are you doing that one next?
I haven't played that one, but that was it was a very, very different experience. So I like what you said. There would be times when my internal being was screaming things that are not appropriate. And my outer being would say, okay, let's dig in that. Let's process that. Let's see where, that thought is coming from. Where have you, what's the foundation? What's the basis? And doing a lot of education about the history of this country. And again, that you're right, it could be a whole nother podcast to talk about some of those things that would be very normally said and not interpreted as racist to the speaker. But me as an African American woman, or I use the word Black mostly, I don't as a Black woman, the listener highly offended, but in a therapeutic relationship, that was not as important as my client's healing. And I'm able to put that aside for the most part.
Yeah. And I'll take it a step further, is that this client used to say to me, don't get offended now. Like, she would get it ready to say something and say, don't get offended. So for me, really, that was a lot about more than race. I'll say that. And her saying to me every time she was about to say something that even had any connection at all in the slightest way to race, not even something that was necessarily racist, she would say, don't get offended. So that is an opportunity for me as a therapist, really to start to understand her and understand why she's saying don't get offended, because it's really a lot deeper than just race. It's about the dynamic between herself and the therapeutic relationship and the therapist, right? So there's a lot to be gleaned, even from difficult conversations, that sometimes, like you said, if you just be quiet for a moment, you can really utilize what the client is saying to help them.
And we talk enough that we know we're both different therapists. You get two don't get offended before. I'm just being honest. And I will tell you, the fact that you're saying don't get offended means that what you're saying is offensive. And so, because that ability to give unconditional positive regard does run out. So the first offensive statement we can process. The second offensive statement we can process. That third offensive statement, I'm going to stop you before we lose our ability to have a positive therapeutic relationship.
And I don't want to go off topic. But who said that that's what's necessary in therapy for that client at that time?
What, unconditional positive regard?
Who said that?
What?
That statement. See, a lot of stuff and that's another podcast, but I will say that there are times when the dynamic between you and even your response to what a client says in treatment, it be healthy and therapeutic in its natural, organic way.
Well, I think that cutting them off is healthy and therapeutic because it's allowing them to recognize that anytime you preface a statement with "don't be offensive" or "don't be offended," but you already know that you're going to offend, so you don't need to say that. And so I think that's showing appropriate boundaries, right? And
Correct.
so I use that term to say like the unconditional positive regard is going to run out, meaning that why would I, as a person, allow a client to continue to say offensive things?
And what are you modeling when, like you said, when you
Right.
go?
And it's not helpful. It's not like if the things that they were saying, and this has just been my experience, if the things that they were saying were necessary for their treatment, then it probably wouldn't be offensive. But it's things that are unnecessary for your treatment. It has, nothing to do with your treatment goals, but you're saying it to incite that type of reaction. And I'm not going to give it to you because I'm not going to allow you to keep saying it. So the first time I say, "Can I tell you something?" When I say what? But don't get offended. I can't promise I'm not going to get offended, but you can still say it. Oh, yes, that was offensive. The second time, same thing. That third time, no, you can't tell me. Because you know it's going to be offensive because we did this dance twice. Both times I was offended.
And I will say to you that they want offense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their way of trying to work through something that they know is a part of who they are that they don't like.
Well, you won't get that exchange with me because we did that twice already. So again, you get two. That third one, I'm just telling you, don't do it. You're not going to get it. And again, we're different therapists, so you might let them do it 10.
No. I totally. I'm just saying that the reason that they're continuously engaging you in this way is there to work through something that, and I will use this word, and I'm only using this word because there's an actual article, and I was actually trying to look it up while we were talking, but I couldn't find it. But there's a concept. You're gonna get in trouble for this, but it's called parasitic whiteness.
Okay. Well, no, I didn't say it, so
I said it. So
you said it, but we're not getting in trouble.
If you have references that you can plug with this, we can maybe some articles, that will be helpful to other therapists after they listen to the podcast. We can kind of give them this article. This is just talking about a psychoanalyst who really believed in processing and the damage that white supremacy and some of these things have done to white people. So there's a lot that it seems if a client is continuously saying to you, "Don't get offended," they are trying to process some things that have been that they know are harmful to who they are.
Well, I agree with that.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't set boundaries. I agree with that 100%. I just think even looking at it clinically, from a psychoanalytic perspective, there's a lot of work even in that interaction. And there's nothing wrong with you responding in a way that lets them know that there's a necessity for them to be empathetic to another human being.
Right. And I agree that I recognize those things. A lot of times I know that in that experience of being the only Black person, not just in the office, but also in the area for the most part. Even if I went to go get lunch at a fast food restaurant, the people who worked there, the people who were serving me were most times white. That I was probably one of the first Black people that they had ever interacted with. And to have that genuine ability to ask anything of me, I think they appreciate it. But as you're saying, you still have to have empathetic that I am a human. And you can't ask me anything knowing it's offensive without possibly getting an offensive response. So that's why I pause, because the first two I can give you. That third one, I don't know what you're going to get. So
you shouldn't have to.
So I don't do it. So that kind of goes into the next thing that I want to ask you. How do you deal with a client who is dismissive of the race issues? So I've had clients who want to bring it up in therapy to be validated that it is not necessary to talk about.
That they're not racist? Is that what you're getting?
Meaning, like they may say, everybody every time I turn on the news, Miss Candice, they talking about something else with this race stuff, and this is 2022. We don't even have those issues. We didn't already had a black president. So, what you think?
They want to feel better. So
Mhm.
you
Oh, I
want
know that part, but I asked, how do you
me to
deal
take
with
my
it?
clinical hat off. Okay, so I have to remember you're asking me because clinically there's a lot there. They're really getting permission for racism or to feel the way they want to feel okay about what they feel.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to give them the permission to feel okay about what they feel. So I definitely have had that happen where people bring up stuff that has nothing to do with therapy. I'm like, why are we talking? This is not why you're here.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, I do is give a smile and a nod and move on. Okay, so tell me about your week. I'm not engaging in that. I'm not going to give you the permission to feel comfortable about being racist.
Okay.
At another therapist because you can't find it here.
So you're saying you remind them of their treatment goals basically, and you sidestep it, or you address it? Do you feel like that
I'm going
smiling
to
and
address
nod?
it because this is what I would do. Depending upon the context, I would say, what do you think?
Okay, so you process it.
Because what I think doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Moment. I wouldn't say that last sentence, but I would
Right.
say, what do you believe we're in 2022 over the issues of race and racism? And I would let them come up with their own answer. And once we're done with it, we're done with it. But you're not going to get me to alleviate your guilt when you hear about things that make you uncomfortable because you don't want to deal with them, to make you feel they don't matter. And I think it's important that, again, we realize that's what they're doing and we don't take the bait.
Right.
And I feel like based on what you just said to me, that was that's baiting, so something happens, you come in and you have a black therapist, so you're going to be my dumping pot.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be my canister for all of what I'm feeling. So here's the thing, I can be here to hear you, right? But you're not going to bait me to make you feel better about what you're feeling. That's two different things. So yes, you're in therapy, you can certainly talk about all that you feel, including if you feel like the cops should have gotten off that killed George Floyd. If you want to come in my office and say you are angry about that, you have every right. I, however, draw the line at trying to help you to feel better about that. See, there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I can allow you to talk about those feelings. I can help you to process your feelings. And that is totally legitimate. And that's totally an integral part of treatment. But I'm not going to get into an exchange where you want to hear what I have to say, because essentially you're trying to get me to alleviate how you feel. What I have to say about it isn't important. What do you have to say about it?
Right. They want to be able to say, my therapist, and
Who's
she black, y'all.
Yeah.
She agreed with me. She agreed with me. She said I was right. And,
Right.
That's not going to be the hand they fan with, as they say. Have you had any clients come to you specifically for issues related to racial trauma?
I have not, but that's because there's such a lack of awareness about it, I feel. Mm-hmm. So I say that, I mean that I don't know anyone that's educated enough about what we're talking about in terms of how racial trauma affects people enough to even say, I'm coming in the door because this is what I'm having to deal with. I think it's become such a norm, and particularly American or Black people have become calloused and numb to the things that we've experienced. We would never think typically to say, I'm coming in to deal with racial trauma, because that's always been, which in fact is the perfect evidence that it's traumatic, is that so numb to those things that we have to, that hypervigilance, that all of these things that we experience daily, these microaggressions and all these, like you said, these quote unquote Karen moments that we laugh about to cope. Mm-hmm. We're so numb to them that we would not walk through the door and say, I need treatment because I'm having a hard time coping with some of these events that could be considered traumatic, that are racial trauma. So the answer, and short answer, is no. And I don't think that's because they haven't had it. I think that's because there's not a lot of awareness about what it looks like when you're experiencing difficulty coping with those things.
And I'm gonna say I have had clients who didn't word it that way, but when they came in, and that's usually because of my employee assistance work that I do. When they came in,
Yeah.
they came in because of problems at work, right? I've been
Right.
on the job, I've been dedicated, and they keep promoting other people over me who are white and then asking me to train them. And that, like you said, and I wouldn't even call that a microaggression, because that's, to me, aggressive. That's not even a micro.
Right.
And I've had clients come in under their EAP for work stress. And I've had quite a few that when we get into it, they're being harassed at work because of their race. And, sometimes, especially as Black women, because of their race and their gender. And so, they don't frame it that way, but I clearly can see it that way. And then in the work that I've done with the criminal justice system, I've definitely had clients who have come and the trauma is because of their race. Again, they don't see it that way, and I don't even know if society always sees it that way. But they'll, the thing they may say is, well, I got 20 years for this amount of crap, where, the white person got a slap on the wrist for the same amount of cocaine. And that's not fair. Do you think that's fair? With those kind of conversations? But truly, that's racial trauma, because the laws or the system causes these issues. And so I think that when we reframe, or when we talk about racial injustice, or we talk about racial trauma, we have to educate. It's our job to educate people about what racial trauma is and how it can show up, and how, even that client that comes in and is no longer motivated to, and it may come in as a depression, or, phase of life type thing, or, adjustment disorder. It could sometimes be racial trauma, but they just don't recognize what it is.
Yes, I totally agree. And when you put it in that context, I think where I experienced that the most is when I was a school social worker, and really helping parents to understand what's going on with their children, really watching the dynamics when Black children were disciplined in a much harsher way, when they were treated like adults when they were children. And I could go on and on. That's a whole nother podcast. Write that one down. So,
we recorded. I'm happy.
Okay, good. You got them all already. So essentially, I agree 100% when you looked at how Black boys were labeled as emotionally disturbed, right?
You said were as if it's past tense. Are?
Well, yes, because I'm not there anymore. God bless the school social workers.
Are.
And were meaning when I was there, that's what was going on. I still have the issue, but thankfully I'm not in their shoes. God bless school social workers. But that is a conversation that's real. These are things, like you said, that are going on, and it's our job to educate families, clients, and parents about, because what does that do, right? If you know that your response to what's happening with my child is not the same if as a child who is white, adds another level to that traumatic experience. I have been in a school where a kindergartner was handcuffed. So when you know and understand what's going on, it adds another level of anger. It adds another level of clinical symptoms that are more severe. Right. Because it's not just that this traumatic incident happened, like jail, right? Or a child was expelled or harshly disciplined, or whatever the event was. Now you have to add the layer of race and racism, which makes the recovery and the healing more difficult. Right.
And when you think about, like, when we talk about racial trauma, it's the lived experiences, but it's also the vicarious trauma, meaning the things that we heard, just growing up, hearing things from my grandparents, watching videos. I don't know if kids still watch the things of the 60s and prior to the 60s, but watching those videos was traumatic for me as a
Yeah,
child. And
yeah.
and some of those things, still we carry with us. And as you said, we're just not educated enough to know saying we need to heal these things. Like,
You're talking about intergenerational trauma, 100%.
mm-hmm,
We the fact that we're told, and this is what everyone has heard, you have to be 2 times, 100%, 3 times better than somebody else. That's a trauma response. You have to
mm-hmm,
test. That's what you have to do. And so, and you know what? We are seeing a high rate of African American children that increase in suicide.
right.
That's not an accident. That is actually, if and I hope somebody's listening, maybe they want to do some research on this. Maybe it's you, Candice.
We'll see. We'll see.
Look, I'm giving everything to you. You do it.
Yeah, I got that. I got that.
Directly, the correlational. I would think that maybe there's a correlation between all of these events and all of our racially charged environment and the increase in Black children's suicide attempts and suicide rates.
Well, I think what you're saying is because when you screen for everything else, it's the only thing that the factor that's left is race. And so that has to be race that causes that because it's not socioeconomic class. Like the research that is available shows that it has to be something racial related, and it's not something genetically inherent in Black children that they're creating, increasing their suicide attempts or suicidal ideation. It is the society has changed.
And it's in recent years, right? It used to,
Yes.
people used to say that thing, oh, well, Black kids don't
That has completely.
suicidal, or Black kids don't, and we've seen that is totally false.
Mm-hmm.
And the rates skyrocket, and it's almost like, okay, like you said, and it's changing racially charged for them, right?
Right.
Little people, as children, as kids, this is the environment and the bubble they're growing up in, and it's like it must be some correlation. If someone possibly studied that, I wouldn't.
It sounds like you're saying you want to do some research on that, and
Sounds
I
like, yeah, no.
wholeheartedly support you in that mission of doing that research.
Well, you'll be the co-researcher.
Yeah, probably so. That's true. Yeah, because I have different theories about those kind of things and how race plays a part in just our children's self-image. Of course, those things were normalized for us, for our generation, to hear things like you got to work twice as hard, be twice as good to get half as much. Our children don't necessarily adhere to that model. They don't want to adhere to that model, and that encourages me. But then the rest of society hasn't changed, and so they still have those same racist incidents, and maybe not as equipped to handle them with the sense of community that we had. Right? I think that when you started seeing things about the talk and talking to your children about racism, and that became a big thing in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, right? That people started saying, talk to your children about racism, talk to them about what to do when they're getting stopped by the police. Those things have always been part of the Black community and the Black education, passed on from generation to generation. And then I think at one point or another, maybe we paused. I know as a parent, I was very hopeful. And so I really was intentional about not putting my experiences on my children as far as with race. I really wanted to, let them experience the world as I thought it would become. And so I was one of those parents that said, okay, wait, now I have to have the talk. I have to sit down and explain to you that your experience in the world is Black, and that everything that I'm doing as far as trying to elevate you does not shelter you or provide any type of buffer from your experience as a Black child in this world. So, and I don't know if that's part of it, just that sense of I always knew I was a Black person. And I don't know how my children are getting their education about who they are as a person. I mean, obviously, anybody who knows me knows enough that I am Black. and I have to say it like that because, I'm not bougie Black. I'm Black.
What is bougie Black, girl? By
You know what that is. That's you. Look, you know that's you. When we say what is that, but
Yeah, that's true. I wish they could hear the end of this, but I'm gonna wait till the recording stops.
yeah, they're gonna hear it. Okay. But yeah, so one of the things, and this is kind of what we're gonna start wrapping up is we talked about a lot about race, but as a therapist or a client who's saying, okay, I know now I'm educated about it, and I do realize I've been racially harmed and I should get some therapy, what would be something that they would look for so that they know that their therapist is going to be competent to deal with racial trauma?
Well, I don't think there's, I think you should find a therapist who is clearly having ongoing training in culture and diversity and anti-racist practices, who clearly uses language that aligns itself with anti-racist thoughts and theory and practice. And I mean, I would say to let's even, because competent is a tricky word. You're never really competent, but someone who's open to really ensuring that they set a safe environment for you,
Mm-hmm.
you through the door to feel however you feel when you've experienced those things. Here's a red flag. This is free, okay? No charge for this, y'all.
Okay.
If when you mention race, your therapist freezes, it's not the right person for you. So
Mm-hmm.
this is to the therapists who are listening, you can, black or white, you have to be ready to deal with these issues, and you cannot freeze when
Right.
are brought into your treatment session, because the message you're sending is don't talk about that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a clear indicator. If you don't feel comfortable, you have to ask yourself, why am I not comfortable bringing this up to my therapist? And then look for culturally diverse and racially diverse treatment providers. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they will necessarily give you they'll be the practitioner for you, but
Right.
it's a start,
That's a
because may have some empathy about and understanding culturally of your experiences.
And I'm gonna add one more piece that I know you were just making as an assumption that they are trained in trauma.
Right. Yeah, I didn't say that. I mean,
Yeah,
but
that's a
here's the
given.
that's in our minds it's a given, but you're right. And that's why when we talked about the audience and who's listening, is that what does that mean? So I am glad you brought that up, because people are saying, I do trauma work. What does that mean? What are you trained in? What
Mm-hmm.
modality are you trained in? What types of trauma have you treated? Because different traumas have different
Right.
dynamics, right? What ages have you treated? How long have you been doing this? Where have you received this training, right?
Right.
All of those are valid questions, and don't just list, just because we have credentials or license does not mean we have those specialty areas. And so some people, may need to have additional training, and that's okay.
And I love that because I had a guest on who said similar stuff about interviewing your therapist. And so I love that you're seconding that
100%. Yes.
interview your therapist, check their resume, ask them all the questions, listen for their answers, listen for red flags. You're hiring a professional. So don't just, oh, they have a license and they take my insurance, I'm going to go see them. That is how you possibly could get harmed.
And if they have a problem with you asking those questions, that's a clear indicator that's not the person that you need to see.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is uncomfortable with that interview, with you asking questions about their qualifications, go the other way.
Move on. Move on.
Yeah, move on.
And so this topic, I know obviously again it was much more on the fly than because of this, what is happening in the world today. But I was wondering, have you considered a training specifically for this? Because I think this is something that
Oh,
therapists need
I
more
just
of.
said that. So we do have an upcoming training, and the dates will be shortly. So you can go to opsfamilycare.com and look for those dates. They haven't been up yet, and we're going to do those shortly. And it's called It's actually talking about racial trauma and its impact on helping professionals. And so that is a workshop that is beneficial to social workers, counselors, anybody. It could be a nurse, anyone that is client facing and is in what we call the helping professions.
It sounds like educators too. I was gonna say it
I
sounds
was going
like
to say educators, especially, that they're definitely the front line of helping. So
to give the website one more time.
it is opsfamilycare.com. I don't say the www anymore because they say that makes me old, and it's
That
not.
is, but you can spell it out. OPSF.
Yes, O as in Oscar, P as in Paul, S as in Sam, familycare.com. I'm the executive director and founder of the agency. I also work as a consultant and a speaker and a trainer for other agencies with CDS Healthcare Consulting, which is my consulting agency. So yeah, please look for that workshop, and it will be within before the end of June. So hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have some information there for registration. And we're trying to decide if we're going to be virtual or in person, but we will definitely have potentially a virtual option, even if we are in person. But definitely please look for the website and keep up to date on our workshops and trainings.
And is there a contact me form on your website if anybody wants to contact you for
There
speaking?
is. You can just, if you want more information about anything that I'm talking about or the upcoming trainings, there is a form that says contact us, and you can send that there. You can actually call the agency at 504-367-6888, or you can send us an email at care@opsfamilycare.com.
All right, before we close out, I want to ask it, we talked for about an hour. If you just want the guests to know one thing, the takeaway, something that they would leave here with, what would that be?
I think that would be you don't ignore your emotions and use them as fuel to fuel you. Take care of yourself, but use what you're feeling as kind of gasoline to push you to whatever it is that you want to do. That's the takeaway for me. What we talked about could seem very, frustrating and hopeless and sad, but there's so much hope in that. When you think about people like John Lewis, when you think about people like Sojourner Truth, or you think about people like Fannie Lou Hamer, and all of these people that through these circumstances that we could never imagine, still produced what they did with their life and the fruit of their lives. Mm-hmm. They use those things that they felt as fuel. And so it doesn't matter what arena you're in. I don't care if you're a janitor. I don't care if you're a nurse. I don't care if you're a teacher. I don't care what you do. If you're a doctor, those emotions are okay to feel. And then take care of yourself and then use them as fuel to continue to be a part of the fight in the movement. That's all I would say is a takeaway.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest today. We are so excited you were able to come, and that was a wonderful takeaway. So we're going to end on that. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Bye.
Bye.